Good evening. I'd like to call to order the Committee of Infrastructure. This is Wednesday, August 22nd, 2018, at 7 p.m. here in the Automatic Chamber. Can the clerk please call the roll?
Certainly, Mr. Chair. Alderman Lopez? Here. Alderman Schmidt is here. Alderman Jettie? Here. Alderman Gidge?
Here.
And Chair O'Brien?
Present. Okay.
Also present, Alderwoman Melisi.
Thank you. Let the record reflect that, please, and thank you to the clerk. All right, we'll open up now to public comment. Mr. Cutter?
I'm Jim Cutter, 86 Palm Street here in the city, and a letter to Alderman O'Brien. Dear Alderman O'Brien, we are anxious for the Gilbertsons who are violating RSA 635:2, number 1, criminal trespassing, and RSA 31:102, obstructing access to highways, to remove their fence and tin shed from our property. When the city building inspector approved a permit for Jim Gilbertson, it may have caused him to think he now had the gap of vacant land he wanted. But we know he would have been wrong, because a gap of vacant land will never be found in a driveway. And the Gilbertsons need to realize their deed is very important. Thus, the actual dimension required by NRO Section 36 plats on May 13th, 1971, Karen/Gilbertson building permit should be enforced with 51 feet and not 53.57 feet. There is a rule that the building permit, tax map, and deed must agree with each other. After visiting with Angelo Marino, Chief Assessor, and the GIS technician, the 2007 Gilbertson tax map was corrected and continues to be. Please inform James L. and Annette R. Gilbertson, who have moved to 145 Page Road, Litchfield, New Hampshire 03052, and Realtor Bobby Sinyard, Bean Group, 108 Panema Road, Amherst, New Hampshire 03031, to remove the fence and metal shed from our driveway. Sincerely, Jim. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cutter. Is there any other member of the public who would like to come up and address the board, please? Seeing none, we will close communications. We'll close public comment, and we'll now get into communications.
From Stephen A. Bolton, Corporate Counsel, concerning Ordinance 018-007. There being no objection, Chairman O'Brien suspended the rules to accept and place the communications received regarding the overnight parking ban.
And I would also like to suspend the rules to enclose the letter from Mr. Cutter to be included in the minutes. Thank you. No objections? Outstanding.
Unfinished business resolutions, we have none. Unfinished business ordinances, we have Ordinance 18-007, which we have just dealt with.
Yes. On 018-007, infrastructure may propose amendments to the previous ordinance. On June 12th, there was a second reading for the full Board of Aldermen, and it was referred to the original versions. No amendments were made. On June 27th, Infrastructure made additional proposed amendments. July 10th, a third reading, full board postponed until the 8/14 meeting. On August 14th, a fourth reading was granted, and the board reaffirmed the original versions. No amendments were ever made at the full board meeting. I want you to note that the Board of Aldermen did not amend 018-007. The ordinance is now to be considered in its original form and is now referred to the committee, and it is before you. The chair would like to recognize corporate counsel to speak on that, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As indicated in that memorandum that I had sent previously and was accepted by the committee this evening, I recommend that you don't include the proposed amendment that would add the sentence, "This section shall be enforced in accordance with the provisions of section 74-1 through section 74-5. Those sections are an administrative enforcement policy that were designed to be used by code enforcement, the building officials, and the public health department in their inspections of the various issues which they enforce and are under their jurisdiction. The police had no involvement in adopting those procedures, commenting on those procedures, designing those procedures in any way that would make them coordinate with their existing manner of doing things. I think if the police are going to have to enforce this, and we have no other agency to enforce it, they should be left to do so the way they ordinarily do, and that would be to either issue a summons or make an arrest. Now, frankly, I cannot envision them making an arrest for a violation under this provision. And as you know, the provisions related to snow being pushed into the street and so forth has been around for decades, and as far as I know, no one's ever been arrested for it. And I don't know that anyone's ever been fined for it, but people have been, I know, warned by the police and advised that if they did not cease to put snow into the street, that they would be summoned and they would be subject to a fine. And frankly, I think that's all that the alderman who sponsored this originally intended, that pushing or raking leaves and lawn clippings and other such things into the street would be treated exactly as how snow has been treated for decades. If there's some concern that the general penalty provision that provides for $1,000 as a maximum per violation is excessive, I will tell you I don't think any judge would impose a $1,000 fine for the first offense, and it's not mandatory, it's the potential maximum. But I would prefer, if you wanted to say that upon violation someone would be fined a maximum of $200 or some other amount, I would prefer that than to try and get mixed up with the administrative enforcement procedures. And there are a couple reasons for that. One, as I said before, the police are not familiar with that procedure. It does not jive with their current procedures. It would, they'd incur expenses for training, and frankly, I doubt that they would be motivated to have a separate procedure for this one specific violation. But aside from that, the way it reads now, that says it shall be enforced in accordance with these provisions are not mandatory now for anything. If someone is violating the zoning ordinance, we can choose to go after them by way of these administrative enforcement procedures, or we can go to court and seek injunctive relief and get them to stop. If this is passed in this manner, this is the only way. And if you get someone doing something that is egregious and truly dangerous, this will tie our hands. And this is a long, slow process. And I would prefer to have our options open, just in case we have something that's more serious than usual, and not be bound to go through what for minor things is sufficient, but for a major thing is going to be slow and tedious. So, thank you for that. The other amendments, providing exceptions and so forth, I'm perfectly happy with.
Thank you to the corporate counsel for that explanation. I will allow if anybody wants to have a question to corporate counsel first. Seeing none, I recognize Alderman Melissa Goja.
Thank you. Yes, first, I would make a motion to recommend final passage of this piece of legislation, and just speaking to the comments from Alderman or Attorney Bolton, I spoke to Chief Lavoy and also had email communication with him, and he is in complete agreement with the recommendations from Attorney Bolton. And as Attorney Bolton stated, typically what happens if there's a situation, there's a warning given, but we don't see the issuing of summons. So as the maker of the motion, I would recommend final passage of this legislation in its original form.
Okay. There is a motion for a final passage of 018-007 in its original form. Before I move it to the question, just to make sure everybody is able to see, I did ask the automatic liaison to provide each of you with a copy of the original, so it should be on your desk. And basically, the changes would be on the original, the ones that that is underlined.
Right.
That would basically just include push or blow and changes yard debris, including but not limited to leaves and grass clippings. Okay, so you should have that. Alderman Jettie.
So, Mr. Chairman, I would appreciate Attorney Bolton's comment on this. You said that that we were back to the original motion. My understanding is that that this committee, has amended it twice. And the latest amendment, which we sent to the full Board of Aldermen, who re-referred it to us, my understanding is that the ordinance, the proposed ordinance that is now before us is the same one that we sent to the Board of Aldermen, which would include, the language making the exceptions about, placement directed or requested by the Division of Public Works, and then so the first amendment was to add that language. The second amendment was to change the enforcement provision. So I think that what we need to do, if we're going to follow Attorney Bolton's recommendation, what we need to do is take the ordinance that is before us is the one that we sent to the Board of Aldermen. We have to amend that to return the enforcement procedure to what it was, being subject to punishment as provided in Section 1-12. Am I correct, Attorney Bolton?
Would you direct that through the chair, please?
Yeah.
Do you have a question for Attorney Bolton, you may ask? Attorney Bolton.
Okay. I hate these questions about order and where we are in amendments and whatnot. It doesn't make any difference as long as everyone here understands. I think that the chair was clear on how he wanted it treated. Strictly speaking, if someone objected to that procedure, the committee could have taken a vote at the time. and that probably would have been the time to raise it if we're being highly technical. I think approaching it from either direction would have been acceptable as long as everyone knows what's going on. So if the chair wants to have it done one way, he can insist on that. If the chair wants to put it up to a vote of the committee, he can provide for that manner. I don't, as I say, I don't really think it matters as long as it's clear what you do with this.
And if I may, thank you to the council. Alderman Jettie, from my understanding in researching this matter, the amendments were never picked up by the full board. So in essence, the only thing that is before us to be considered this evening is the original amendment. Anything else would have to be an additional amendment or something that construed. And it seems to be the existing two amendments that you're referring to evidently does not pass muster by our legal department. So therefore, the only thing that is before us is the original amendment. Now, that doesn't mean, from my understanding, that in the future, as with all our ordinances, anybody could come in and try to write an additional or another amendment on it. But the question, there is a pending motion before this board right now to pass 018-007 in its original presentation. Alderman Malaysia Gosha.
Yes, I would like to retract my amendment and amend the original legislation, because you are totally right. This has not really been viewed as being amended because it's only been proposed to the Board of Aldermen and they have never approved it. And that was my missing the process. So I believe there were several amendments made. And so on page 1, 2, 3 of this document, there is the amended version that we had worked on, which reflects the subject of punishment as provided under provisions 1 through 12, which is what the police would enforce. If we could, I would like to amend it with that version that's moved through this committee. So it says, no person shall by himself or by his agent or agents throw, push, blow, or put any snow, ice, or yard debris, including but not limited to leaves, branches, and grass clippings, into the right-of-way of any way, street, lane, alley, or sidewalk. This section shall not apply to the following situations. Placement has been directed or requested by the Division of Public Works, or cleanup or collection of material is simultaneously occurring. Any person who shall violate this section shall, upon conviction, be subject to punishment as provided in provisions 1 through 12. So that is where we were prior to changing enforcement. And so that is what I would like to amend the original ordinance with.
And I think that you can, but how do we, let me remind the alderman, how did we get here? And I don't want to really do it again. I do not think at this committee level is the right time to really start coming out and really putting amendments, although sometimes it does work, I understand. But in a matter such as this, where it involves the legal, right now, we seem to have questions with the legal department as it was previously amended. And to ask legal, excuse me,
Yep.
to come to a, at the meeting, to come up with an explanation on it, I don't know if that's fair of the legal department, if he's capable of doing that. And I think the question should be asked to corporate counsel, on your proposal, does he feel comfortable with that? Or would corporate counsel like to review that, have time to chew on it, so to speak, and review it, and then come back and make a recommendation to this board? Because seeing in that, I do not want this committee chasing its tail. I'm not saying this is not a worthwhile, it most certainly is worthwhile. However, I would like to get it right, so.
If I
Well,
may
yes.
ask, if I may ask Attorney Bolton a question through you. My understanding was that the reason we had brought the question to you regarding this piece of legislation and the amendments was around where enforcement should be placed. And originally, it was under the jurisdiction of the police department through standards that they typically enforce. And that last proposed amendment moved it into the arena of code enforcement. And your recommendation was that we go back. But the rest of what was proposed as amendment, my understanding was fine. And Public Works had also said that they were fine with those other proposals.
Yeah, I tried to indicate that when I spoke before. What you just read, Alderwoman Malisi Golja, is essentially, and I think word for word, what this committee had come out with recommending following its or during its May 23rd meeting of this year. Myself, as well as Attorney Clark, looked at it at that time, and we were fine with it. We had no objection. So we would continue to have no objection.
Okay, thank you.
So, yes. Oh, Alderman Lopez, thank you. Thank you.
So I just wanted to express my support and appreciation for what Alderman Malisi Goya was proposing, because particularly I was sympathetic to the individual who came and pointed out that if the Public Works told him to move stuff, then he should be liable for moving it. But then additionally, a priority of mine is the sidewalks, because a number of companies will remove snow or yard debris to a sidewalk, and yes, the city could go after them in court, but typically they don't. And it is a unmanageable problem, in my opinion, in many areas, because there isn't something more direct for addressing it. So I was in favor of the amendment that we had discussed previously. I wasn't present for the part where we confirmed the last amendment, and I understand Attorney Bolton's point, but I think the version that Marianne Malisi Goya has proposed, I would be in support of. And I would also point out that this is actually one situation where we should have used a goldenrod copy, because it would have made it easy to figure out which one of these are. It's the one situation.
The chair recognizes, but we did it on one white. Sorry, my apologies. I was kind of doing that. Forgot about the goldenrod. The chair would like to ask corporate counsel, it's not yet an amendment, but you are in agreement, just to make sure, because this is very worthwhile. I agree with it. I just want to make sure we get it right. You do agree with what is now being proposed to this board?
Yes.
Very good. Thank you. Then that would mean Alderman Malisi Golja, do you have a motion?
I did. I am moving to amend 018-007 with the amendment, with the legislation in the version that I had just read to you, and I know you have a copy of it. So we are striking, for the purpose of this resolution, right-of-way means street or sidewalk, and we have added those other pieces identifying what yard debris is, as well as that no one should have a problem if they're placing things in the street because they've been directed to by DPW, or they or their yard service is in the process of cleaning, and it's obvious it's an ongoing work site for yard waste removal.
Very good, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, any further questions on the pending motion? Seeing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Seeing none, the newly 018-007 as amended is now accepted. Thank you.
Thank you. So shall we ask for final passage on that?
I recommended final passage.
Final passage.
Yeah.
So the motion was for final passage, but let's
As
clearly
amended.
say that everybody is without objection and agreement of that. Very good. All right. Next,
Next.
Madam Clerk.
Okay. New business resolutions. Resolution 18067, designating rail trail as Class B trail under RSA 231-A.
Okay. Mr. Cummings, if I may take the liberty to ask you to come forward, seeing that you're here, and maybe you can brief the committee on your expertise on this.
I will try my best, Mr. Chairman. Again, for the record, Tim Cummings, Director of Economic Development. This project, or legislation rather, was not coming out of my office per se. I know it originated out of the Community Development Office. Director Marchand is on vacation. I know she worked very closely with Attorney Leonard on this legislation, and it's basically a housekeeping matter. Where from a municipal standpoint, we want to make sure that we have all our trails and walking paths are properly designated. And what we're doing is a housekeeping matter in terms of making sure that we identify and categorize these differing walkways appropriately, so we are afforded the appropriate legal protections. So it's pretty straightforward. It's very simple, and we're hopeful that you're supportive of this matter.
Very good. Alderman Lopez.
I have a question through the chair for Attorney Bolton.
Yes.
Do you know whether or not this designation affects the city's responsibilities for cleaning or maintaining or anything of that nature?
It has no effect on that.
Just want to make sure we're still allowed to use it.
Okay. Looking at the list of endorsers, and I am one, but being chair, I see that our good friend Alderman Gidge is an endorser of this. Would you like to make the motion to recommend final passage?
Yes, I do.
Very
Mr.
good.
Chair.
Alderman Gidge has made a motion to recommend final passage of R 18067. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Seeing none, motion passes. Thank you, Alderman Gidge. Next,
Next, we have R 18-070, authorizing the acceptance of a license from BAE over land located on the corner of Canal Street and Nashua Drive for a bus shelter.
thank you. The clerk would like to ask Ms. Camille Patterson of Nashua Transit System to come forward, please, and grab an open seat. You can sit next to Mr. Cummings or anywhere you wish. And I will allow you now, if you want to go through your presentation. We do have the map up here. And basically what we're talking about, and if I may just take a second, where the cursor is, I don't know if you can see it up there on the screen, but Canal Street is right here where the cursor is. This little gray section that goes through a parking lot is Nashua Street, and where the proposed bus terminal would be is right where this little blue dot is. Am I correct? Very good. Thank you. Carry on, please.
Okay, Camille Pattison. I am the transportation manager for the city, and I oversee Nashua Transit System. So we're here before you this evening to seek acceptance of the bus shelter license. This is to allow a shelter in the location that Alderman O'Brien has just pointed out. It's on BAE's property. It will be open to the public. The idea behind the shelter, BAE will be responsible for the maintenance, including trash removal, snow removal, and Nashua Transit System staff will install and construct a shelter at this location. I'm sorry, I've got a cold. I'm trying to get through this without coughing too much. So the shelter is being located here in conjunction with the new downtown connector route, which you can see up here on the map. The blue and black dots are proposed bus stops, and this is coming on the heels of the Crown Street parking ride opening up. And the downtown connector is designed to provide access between the Crown Street Park and Ride, the parking garages at High Street and Elm Street, businesses and restaurants along Main Street, and then you've got larger employers that will also be served by this, such as Southern New Hampshire Medical Center, BAE, and those are especially congested areas. You know, BAE is facing some significant parking limitations. The hospital area is also very congested, and the service will hopefully alleviate some of that parking need. They can park at other locations such as the Park and Ride and Elm Street and get to places of employment. And the service will be looking at running Monday through Friday, just before 6 a.m. and running till just after 8 p.m. at half-hour intervals. There'll be an increase to 15-minute intervals in the morning, roughly between 8 a.m. and 10 a.m., potentially in the afternoon if needed. I can take any questions that you
Okay,
have.
additional questions, Alderman Lopez?
I just wanted to observe that we've talked about the hospital and BAE, but this loop would also be really convenient to people in Crown Hill and French Hill who are trying to get to the station for their morning work, because I'm aware of a number of people who, particularly in French Hill, have to walk to the station so they can get the first bus that's heading to work. So this, I think this is going to be very popular.
The other thing too, sorry, Camille Pattison, Nashua Transit, we did have quite a bit of interest from the CDE Street neighborhood, and they wanted a bus stop in closer proximity. So you can see on the easternmost end of Temple Street, there's a black dot there. That will get them a bus stop closer than where they're currently going. Another new thing too, there'll be a bus stop right at the Nashua Public Library. There is not one currently. And then the new housing on Franklin Street would also benefit from this. And the final thing probably to note too, when rail eventually comes to downtown Nashua, it will be served at that Crown Street Park and Ride location. So ideally, transit would mix in with that well for intermodal access.
Very good to fit rail in there. We like that. Some of us like that. Very good. Bus people support rail. Thank you very much. Any further questions of Ms. Pattison? Seeing none, the chair would like to entertain a motion on R 18007, 070. Alderman Lopez.
I'd like to make a motion to recommend final passage.
Thank you. Alderman Lopez makes a motion to recommend final passage. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Seeing none, motion passes. Thank you, Ms. Patterson.
Thank you very much.
New business ordinances.
Next, we have 018-020, prohibiting parking on a portion of the south side of East Pearl Street.
Alderman Lopez.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that this was recommended by the Streets Department, but it's directly in front of Mary Sweeney. It's a small area, and it basically creates an emergency lane for emergency vehicles to move in and respond to emergencies that are unfolding. I think it's really, really needed for that area. If it fills up with parked cars and say an ambulance needs to get in there, they've had a lot of difficulty and it's been a disruption to traffic. So I think it's a really good idea on their part. They just redid the sidewalks, so it's really a good time to introduce that change.
Okay. You put into a different Alderman Lopez, so your intention is to make it an emergency access only, correct?
That was the intention that was communicated to me.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's not going to be like a drop-off or anything else for people in that?
If it's an emergency access, if it's an access that can be used in emergency, it can also be used for that purpose too,
That somebody can drop off?
like medical transport.
For medical transport? Okay.
I mean, if we're being honest, the fire lane isn't always kept entirely clear, but whoever's in there better get out of the way quickly.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, because Alderman Lopez went down today and we took a look at it, and it is directly right in front. There is a curb cut that has been done with new, evidently looks like new masonry work was done to, to pre-approve this and everything. But looking at the original, I didn't see anything with the emergency, and I'm not in any objection to have it in such a way to have emergency access. My question is, does no parking mean no parking, and should it be saying emergency access only? But then again, I'm not going to really, divide the hair on that. I think no parking, and if it's got a truck with an ambulance or a fire truck, I think we're well within good stead. Okay, so you made the motion for final passage, correct?
I think I may not have actually said that, so I'd like to make a
Would
motion
you
for
like
final
to say
passage.
that?
Yes.
Very good. Seeing that, but is there any further discussion? Seeing none, Alderman Lopez has made the motion to recommend final passage on 01820. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Seeing none opposed, motion passes. Thank you, Alderman Lopez. Next,
Next,
Madam
we
Clerk?
have ordinance 18-021, authorizing the city to lease parking spaces located at Crown Street Park and Ride.
seeing that we do have Mr. Cummings here, Mr. Cummings, could you give us a little briefing on this, please?
Yes, Mr. Chair, for the record, Tim Cummings, Director of Economic Development, and relative to this piece of legislation, this actually goes hand in hand and is in tandem with the route service that you just approved. As you may or may not know, the whole concept of this came together through a public-private partnership with BAE, one of our largest employers in the city. BAE approached the city relative to having some concerns and constraints relative to their parking needs. They asked us how we might be able to work together to try to solve the problem. They obviously provide quite a few jobs on Canal Street, something in the order of magnitude of 2,500 or thereabouts, and they are continuing to grow. And with that being said, the idea of having them help seed this bus route that you just approved, they also needed some additional parking. With the Crown Street parking ride coming online, it seemed like a win-win situation where we could temporarily rent them some parking spaces at a market rate, what everyone else pays, as on a month-to-month basis, like everyone else. We thought it was a good way of helping to be a good neighbor. So that's what the ordinance before you does, is allows my office to be able to issue permits, as we customarily do in other parking lots that you give us the ability to do that for here in the brand-new Park and Ride facility.
Very good. Any further questions of Mr. Cummings by members of? Seeing none, the chair is looking for a motion.
Final passage.
Thank you. Alderman Gidge would like to make a motion of final passage on 018-021. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None opposed, motion passes. Next, we have, which is tabled in committee. Seeing no motion to take it off, petition for street discontinuance on a portion of Corner Road. Seeing no motion to take it off the table, shall remain as such. We'll now open up to general discussion. Very quiet group. Oh, Alderman Lopez, yes.
I just wanted to remind the board that there's a group of neighbors that are very, very, very strongly advocating for cleanup of the Mohawk Tannery site. The EPA did have a very largely well-attended public comment session. The public comment was extended, and it's something that I think everybody on the board should be looking at. Development is coming in that area due to the Broad Street Parkway, but doing it right is very important. The neighbors feel, and I agree, that we shouldn't be putting places where people live on top of a toxic waste dump that has been sealed, hopefully for 500 years, but really 100, according to the concept. And I think in terms of infrastructure, those decisions, everything that we do in terms of putting in roads or pipes risks disrupting that. So it's something that everyone on this board should be looking at, or this committee should be looking at, and the board in general is likely to need to monitor.
Thank you, Alderman Lopez. If I can just also say, it's a shame. Fortunately now, we look at things a lot different than we did when Mohawk first started, without ever contemplating the amount of contamination that exists there. And it's I call that neighborhood the Little Florida, or a general area within it, and it's a very nice, residential neighborhood, and I hope we can come to some resolve. I agree with you. Thank you. Any other public comment? General discussion? Okay, seeing none, we'll go to public comment for the second half. Anybody would like to come up? Mr. Cummings?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Again, for the record, Tim Cummings, Director of Economic Development. In a previous meeting, I was before you. We had a conversation about parking, and I wanted to make sure this committee was aware of that. I took your feedback. I am working with the parking manager, Jill Stansfield, who has been in close communication with Attorney Clark. Attorney Clark and Jill Stansfield have developed draft legislation that will make housekeeping changes to our city ordinances that will properly address the organizational matters, the structural matters for how we govern and regulate ourselves from a parking perspective. We do have some material issues that still need to be addressed. I'd be looking for direction from this body as to how you'd like to address those issues relative to the overnight parking permit program. But what I also wanted to make sure the group was aware of is since our conversation, we've taken some administrative actions where we didn't necessarily need to impose regulations in terms of making sure that we followed the proper process that the police followed for taking exceptions, special exceptions. We have mirrored that process identically, and we've actually improved upon it. So previously, you were able to make special exceptions requests, I think, up until 9 p.m. Previously, my office, the parking office, had stated something like 4 p.m. Not only can you do it past 9 p.m. now, we're working towards trying to make it 24 hours. So that's coming down the pike with our IT department, but right now you can do it up until 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night. So we heard the comments loud and clear by this group. We're still going to need to have clarification on how long we should allow these special exemptions to go on for. Currently, under the police practice, it was 3 days. Needless to say, if you have a college student who's home for a certain period of time in the summer, that is not going to necessarily work for you. So I think I would be looking to recommend some sort of temporary visitor type permit, and we could do that on a neighborhood basis. I'm going to need some direction as to which neighborhoods would be interested in that. But that would be just one example of a material type solution that I would need legislation for that I've been working towards over the last couple weeks or so. So I wanted to just give you that quick update.
Alderman Lopez?
I just want to comment because her name came up that I've worked with Jill Stansfield on a number of projects, and she is really easy to work with. She's very, very hardworking. She's very, very thorough. And I just want to take the opportunity to say I really appreciate the work she does.
I want to echo that.
Mr. Cummings, so we seem to be heading, and I thank you, we seem to be heading in the directions. So in theory, when we get to a certain point that we upload the website, everything else like that, if somebody is following our directions and laws and reads our website, and we're going to ask the press, probably put this out in the press, I'm sure you're going to do a PR press release on it and everything else when we finally get there. So in theory, if everybody follows it, nobody would probably get a ticket, am I correct? Yet keep our city streets, well, as long as they notify properly, let me give the usual caveats, right?
If I may,
Yes, you
Mr.
may.
Chairman, I don't know if someone wouldn't necessarily get a citation or not. I can't speak to that, but what I can say is we're taking every effort to provide the public education that this community deserves. Not only are we going to take on that PR initiative that you just outlined, but I'm also working very closely with Treasurer Fredette to see if we can get some sort of mass mailing out through the water bill, so folks are aware of the differing parking
be
regulations as
outstanding,
a
yeah.
way of communicating to the public. So that is something that my office is working on, and hopefully will happen again, so we can say that we've at least provided the information to the public.
Right, Alderman Lopez?
I have a question for Director Cummings through the chair. Is it within the scope of the parking app's capability for someone, say, on Fairmont Street to say, I want my college student to be able to park, I'm going to go on the app and do it that way? I mean, I know it's not right now, but
I
I
was
mean,
just
could
saying-
it be developed?
I can check. I don't know. Let me look into that. That's a good question.
I do have a question with all members of the board here. it seems like Director Cummings seems to be on the right path, and I'll even let Mr. Cummings chime in. Would you like to have an additional monthly report by Mr. Cummings by our next meeting, or do you want it maybe in the meeting after that? What we're talking about is, this is August, September, do you feel, an October update? Would that be more appropriate, Mr. Cummings? And what is the flavor of the board to get a future update from Mr. Cummings on the parking? Alderman Lopez.
As much as I'm reluctant to give Mr. Director Cummings more work to do, I do think the public is, this is one of the most common topics I hear about. So it would probably be a good idea to do at least a regular update of whatever progress is made, just because there's so much negativity being directed at parking, because they only see the negative sides. They don't necessarily see all the positives.
How say the other members, you want it every month? Alderman Gedge?
Yes.
Okay, Alderman Jettie, would you like to have it every month at this
Yes.
particular time?
Yeah,
And,
I think the next month.
Absolutely, yes,
Okay.
please.
yeah.
And if I could, Mr. Chairman.
Yes,
I-
absolutely, Alderman Jettie.
I would also like to invite the public to voice their opinion about this. I know I've received, comments from people who want to be able to park overnight, especially during the good weather. And I've heard comments from people who are concerned about people parking in front of their houses. And and I've heard people express the opinion that their street is curvy, and they think, having cars parked there would be a danger. So I would invite all people to communicate those concerns to their aldermen and to us, so that we can take that all into consideration when we come up with
I totally
whatever
agree.
change we make.
I do encourage all members of the public to provide their ward alderman or alderman at large, such as myself, any opinions you do have on it. But may I just say, and I agree with you 100%, but I like to take it, and I think that we are, if I just may say in an overview, slow and methodically. Because once we allow the horse to leave the barn, I don't think we're ever going to get him back in. So in other words, what I'm referring to, if we just blanket and say, let's allow overnight parking, if we decided to curtail it, I'd much rather do it at this methodic and piecemeal, and to look at it and then to see where we basically are. We got one of those things in this city that it is nice to drive in a very open street at night, but at the same time, the city's not in the business to ticket our people or anything else. So what we're trying to do is find what is best for everybody. So thank you, that's very true. We appreciate the public input on that. Any other follow-up on it? Seeing none. So, Mr. Cummings, we will look forward to your September appearance.
See you next month.
Yes, very good. Thank you. Remarks by the alderman. Seeing none, very good. Possible non-public session, I don't think there's going to be a need for that. Alderman Lopez.
I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
Outstanding. A motion to adjourn by Alderman Lopez. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, the meeting is declared closed at 7:48. Thank you.